All right. Hey, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the OCD and Anxiety Show. My name is Matt Cotty, and I am a licensed clinical social worker and the founder of Restored Minds and the creator of the AAA Response. So, in this episode, I want to talk about a question I get all the time, and that is, what do I do when I feel anxiety or when I feel anxious? Right. And because it's a very common question, and it's a natural question to experience, right? Because when we get anxiety, right, what's happening is the stress response is going off in our body, and that stress response is designed to put us into action, right, to fight or flight, to fight off the threat or flee the danger. So when people get anxious, there's this natural inclination to say, hey, well, what do I do? Because and here's the whole problem with anxiety is that with anxiety, what's happening is your mind is creating a futuristic scenario that's then creating a stress response that's designed to put you in action. Okay. Now, the problem is that because the futuristic scenario isn't real and isn't happening right now, there's nothing actually to fight or flight. You see, so essentially our body's creating this energy, or I should say transforming, sugar into energy that's then propelling us into fight or flight over an event that's not real and that's not happening. So there's this void that we get stuck in where it's like, well, what do I like? What's going on? What do I do? And where most people go, and where I went for a long time, and where a lot of people get stuck, is we go into this idea of, well, I need to fix this feeling. Okay, so then we try to get rid of the anxiety. We try to do things to make ourselves feel better, or potentially alleviate the futuristic idea. Now, here's the problem, though, is that our mind can come up with endless things about the future, right? It can come up with endless worries, endless scenarios about the future, which paradoxically can leave us stuck in the stress response right now over something in the future that hasn't happened. And it can just keep doing that day in, day out, hour by hour, minute by minute in some cases. And this essentially puts us in the stress response in a chronic way. But with the problem being that nothing is ever actually happening. Like there's people, like, and myself included, I experienced years of suffering from anxiety, and I was never actually ever in danger. And I'm sure many of you can relate to that, right? Because again, we can get put in the stress response over futuristic scenarios, and then we can be in the stress response today about tomorrow, and then tomorrow be in the stress response about the next day, and it can just go on this endless cycle. And that's really what happens when you talk about anxiety disorders, is that the person is in a chronic state of stress and they're in no real danger. So then the question becomes, okay, well, what do I do with anxiety? And before I forget, if you're joining us on the show, we really appreciate your support by liking and subscribing, and even leaving a comment for futuristic episodes and ideas and questions that you might have. So please show your support. And also, if you're looking for additional resources on this journey, over at restoredminds.com, I have a link down in the notes where you can start. We just put out a new guide to help you on your journey and really learn how to break out of this loop. So going back to the question, what do I do with anxiety? What do I do when I feel anxiety? And this may sound counterintuitive, but one of the best things you can do is absolutely nothing. And let me explain why. Okay. So when you get anxious about an idea, right? And again, this is what we call psychological stress, meaning your mind is creating a futuristic scenario that's scary to you, or a kind of catastrophic scenario. And it's in your body's generating the fear response as a response to that actual idea, meaning the idea is not really happening. You're not really in danger right now, but your body is signaling to you that you're in danger and you need to fight or flight. That's what psychological stress is. That's what anxiety is. And this manifests in various ways, whether it's OCD, panic attacks, generalized anxiety disorder, phobias, even PTSD, and even things like eating disorders and things like that, right? Is these futuristic ideas that we're reacting to. So when that happens, if we do something to neutralize that idea, right, So let's for instance say if you're about to get on a plane in 3 days and your mind comes up with the idea, well, what if my plane crashes? Okay. Statistically speaking, that's an extremely unlikely event. But what can happen is people that have a fear of flying, especially, you can go into the mind and say, oh shoot, well, like I thought of that, so and then I really had this reaction, so now I need to resolve it. So maybe you do something like canceling your flight, okay, because that's going to solve that potential threat. Well, what happens is as soon as you do that, you validate the idea that that thought really was important and that doing that behavior really kept you safe. So now in the future, if you're going to fly again, well, what kind of thought is your brain going to produce? Well, what if my plane crashes this time? Right? Even if there's no evidence to the actual event taking place. And this is what happens with most anxiety, right? Is we're coming up with these futuristic ideas that generally speaking never happen because our brain doesn't have the ability to predict the future accurately, right? And if it does, like, please go buy the lottery ticket tonight, right? It's like we can't predict and guess the future. It's impossible. And even though we attempt to, the more and more we react to these futuristic threats, the more and more we validate the idea that our brain's actually keeping us safe, so it keeps doing it. This is why people develop phobias and fears over certain topics, is because they validate the fear again and again through their behavior. And so when you feel that surge of anxiety, the best thing you can do is to practice sitting with the feelings themselves and not validating the fear by doing any behaviors to get rid of the feelings. And what will happen is that the anxiety will spike up, right? And you'll feel this surge of energy in your body. And again, one of the reasons that anxiety is so uncomfortable is because your body is putting you into a fight or flight motion, and there's nothing for you to fight or flight, right? There's nothing happening right now. And that's the trap of anxiety, is there's nothing actually to do. So we do these things to try to resolve things and make ourselves feel better. And if something makes us feel better, what happens is that then our brain keeps producing these kind of thoughts, and our body keeps setting off the stress response to these kind of thoughts, and we end up stuck in these loops. And this is really the problem of any struggle with chronic anxiety, is that you get caught in a loop, right? It's not what you're anxious about that's ever the problem, because that doesn't exist right now. What the problem is if you're currently in the stress response and you're not in danger and there's nothing going on in your actual environment that's dangerous, the chronic state of stress wears on the body. And that's what actually causes a lot of damage to the body. And psychological stress, meaning our brain's ability to create these futuristic scenarios, and then when we try to solve them, that's an endless loop that we can stay in for our entire lives. There's a lot of people that go through their entire lives always worrying about tomorrow and never actually living. And that's really when my own experience, when I talk about my experience with OCD and anxiety, like that is the biggest problem, is that when I was really stuck in that loop when I was younger, there was always the next thing to worry about. There's always the next idea, always the next futuristic, terrible thing that could happen. And the trap is that you're always living, trying to protect yourself tomorrow by sacrificing today. And you can do that on an endless loop. So the more, when you feel those surges of anxiety, the best thing you can do is actually not try to get rid of them. And what will happen is when your body is forced into to always come back to normal on its own, right? Like that is just a natural law that occurs in biology. Like what goes up must come down, right? Whether it's an insulin spike, a dopamine spike, it will naturally come back down. Same with the fear response, right? It's like if the fear response is the stress response is set off and it spikes up, it will go back down on its own. And the only way that will happen, though, is if you don't validate that what's happening is dangerous. So as it goes down, it may take a longer time than if you were doing a behavior to try to make it go away. But what happens is then you train your brain that when it's set off, right? When it's set off on whatever topic it was, because you didn't do anything about it and didn't resolve it, you trained your brain that thought really didn't help us. So you experience it less in the future. And more importantly, your anxiety spikes less about that in the future. And this is the whole principle behind something called exposure and response prevention, right? Is not engaging in any behaviors. And that's really the idea is to prevent yourself from responding with behaviors that reinforce the fear. Okay. And so when you feel anxiety, again, it's not about making the anxiety go away. That is not our goal. Your body knows how to do that. You got to begin to trust your body that it knows what to do with this. Okay. And you have to think longer term and say, what I don't want to do is get stuck in that wheel that I got caught in, that many people get caught in. And in order to break the wheel, we actually don't work on stopping anxiety or stopping thoughts. What we do is we actually work on stopping all the behaviors that are spinning the wheel. And so if that's something you wrestle with and something you struggle with, like, please check out the free guide that we have down in the link, because it will really help shine a light on all the things you could be doing without even realizing it, especially the mental behaviors, things like analyzing and ruminating and thought blocking and thought suppressing and silently praying, all that stuff, right? Because that stuff spins the wheel. To answer the question of what do I do when I'm anxious, the best thing you can do is nothing. Is to let the energy come up in your body and to practice just letting the anxiety come down on its own time, because that will not that will show your brain that fear is not valid and that it doesn't need to keep producing thoughts around that subject, because those thoughts aren't currently happening right now. And then you can start to practice again living presently, so that you're just living here today, because today is all we have. Right? That's why they call it the present, a present, right? A gift, because that's all we have, right? Future will happen and it'll take care of itself. And what will happen is you'll begin to build more trust in yourself that you'll be able to handle the present moment as it comes, as opposed to trying to predict the future and trying to solve that before it happens. Because if you do that, you get out of the present. So hopefully that's helpful, and hopefully that makes sense. And again, if you're looking for more help and more resources on your journey, over at Restored Minds, we have, again, our free guide you can start with. We also have our Taking Back Control program, as well as our additional programs to help you on this journey. So thank you so much for hanging out today. Appreciate you guys. Hope you have a great weekend, and I'll talk to you in the next episode. Take care.